What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Yee Yee podcast. This is a special emergency podcast edition. Donald Trump has been announced. He's expected to be the 47th president of the United States. Today is November 6th, Wednesday. Election day was yesterday, and the results are coming in. It looks like Donald Trump is going to defeat Kamala Harris, and things were kind of back and forth. It seemed like people were saying that Trump was going to win by a landslide, and then Kamala Harris's side was saying that they got a lot of late momentum. It turns out that a lot of the polling was correct. Trump is set to be the next president. Just really quick, I guess I'll just give my candid thoughts. I'm joined here by Granger and Tyler. I think that a lot of the people on the right were fed up, and I think that a lot of people that were in the middle were kind of fed up over the last 4 years of those on the left saying that conservatives were literal garbage, calling us racist, transphobic, homophobic. And people like Elon Musk, people like Joe Rogan, people even like RFK Jr., who were really Democrats, voted for Obama, or were just naturally leaning left, are now leaning right, because it's just gotten so extreme. And I think that it finally kind of came back to bite people. I don't know if you guys felt that, but it seems like a lot of guys who are like more historically left leaning are now just kind of tired of the interest rates, of the immigration, of the inflation, of the men in women's sports, the men in women's locker rooms, of the trans movement. And I think that it showed itself. I think that a lot of people thought that there could be voter fraud, which a lot of people still claim happened in 2020. But thankfully, it seems like the system held up, and Trump is set to be the next president.
Yeah, I saw Jeff Bezos. It spoke out today as well. He's another one of those guys that's just kind of the wild card, and all of a sudden he's just celebrating, Yeah, things that you wouldn't expect. I think you said it right. I think a lot of people that were like moderate left or center, I think it really summed it up when one of the later Trump ads said, "She's for they, them, he's for you." I think that really resonated with a lot of people. That for a lot of people, the social justice, cultural protection, I don't know the right words in politics, but like that's always important. But to what extent? Like, how far do we push this before it starts affecting our own paychecks? Speaking for these people that are like center or moderate left, I think eventually they were just like, you know what? They're not saying anything about the economy. All they care about is pushing some kind of identity agenda. And like, yes, that's important to me, but I've had enough of it. I think that's kind of the voice that was coming from that side. And I think that's what has been the most surprising. And they were kind of the silent majority. Everybody knew, like the Republicans and the right wingers, everyone knew that wasn't the issue. And the far left, that wasn't the issue either. I think the middle is what changed everything.
Yeah, but I also think that it was people on the right that were fed up with it, that hadn't necessarily voted in the past, that were like, hey, I have to go do my duty and vote. You know what I mean? Did you at least feel that a little bit?
I don't know. I think, because don't you think that happened in 2020?
Not as much as this year. I think there's more people that were like, there's so many people that either thought my vote doesn't count, or they're just going to do mail fraud anyway. And I was thinking about, I was like, well, that's what they want. They want you to think they're just going to manipulate it and your vote doesn't count, so just stay at home. But I feel like people were like, no, and they went, which helped.
Yeah.
That combined with what
Elon Musk was quoted on Rogan saying that he felt like this election was especially important because of what the Democrats were doing and the Democratic Party and the system and the deep state was doing, bringing in all of these hundreds of thousands and millions of illegal immigrants. And Musk claimed that their goal was to turn every state into essentially California, and that they're just shipping in these illegal immigrants so that they can have that extra voting power so that they can ultimately take control. And he seemed to think that this election in particular was a serious threat of that happening under Kamala Harris, with the direction that things were going and with how extreme of views that she holds, because she really is like as far left as they come. I don't know a whole bunch about politics. I've listened to guys smarter than me, like Al Mohler, who has a podcast called The Daily Briefing. And he was talking about how she has the strongest opinions on the trans movement and topics like trans and homosexuality and abortion and on gun control.
Which I think came back in the end to hurt her, kind of to Granger's point, where those people that were like a little bit left-leaning and kind of near the center were like, this is too much. You know, like when we grew up, the Democratic candidates, you know, maybe a Bill Clinton or even an Obama, but like before Bill, I can't remember who was.
Dukakis.
Like those guys were obviously Democrats and had their policies, but it wasn't as crazy as what Kamala's were. So there was those people a little bit to the left were like, yeah, I'm going with Bill Clinton.
Yeah, it's the same with the
It's
Republicans
changed now.
too. It's not George Bush Sr.'s Republicans anymore either.
Yeah, if you look at the official Republican statement and their stance on some of these key issues, it is much more middle-leaning than it was 10, 20 years ago, like you were talking about. If you look at like their official stance on some of those policies like abortion or immigration, they're almost where Democrats were 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So people have the left has gone more left, and then the right has kind of shifted center, and then so conservatives are kind of like, yeah, we'd rather meet you in the middle. A lot of people are like, we'd rather meet you in the middle or lean a lot right than go with the absurdity going on the very far left extreme. Someone said on Allie Beth Stuckey's podcast, Relatable, you're not simply voting for the lesser of two evils, which a lot of people would say that this was, but you're voting, one side quite literally lessens the evil in the United States, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
A good friend of ours, Grant Castleberry, said Trump's policies better align with God's definition of righteousness and justice. He says you have one side that is the Judean Christian worldview, where there is ultimate truth. It prioritizes the traditional family. It says God is ultimate. And then you have the secular worldview on Kamala Harris's side, valuing sexual expression. They say morals are relative and the state and the government is ultimate. So say what you want about Trump. I know that from what I know, he's not a Christian, but the values, whether he knows it or not, are promoting those Christian values that we would believe.
Yeah, so the key there that Grant said was policies, Trump's policies, not Trump.
Right.
So we need to stop thinking about these candidates as we're voting for them and their own morals or their own preferences. Instead, we're voting for what their policies are. You could actually have a preference about something, and then that's not your policy that you want to carry out as a leader. And so we're voting for someone's policies. And someone asked me recently, they said, what do you tell to someone that says I can't vote for Trump because he's just an immoral man? And I said, well, you don't vote for Trump's morals. We're voting for his policies. That's the difference. And there are a few key things in this election that there's a few key policies that were enough to separate the two candidates by a huge chasm.
I'm just excited to not see trans flags at the White House every other week for 4 years like it was with Biden, where it's just ridiculous. Even the people who are in the middle and don't really care and are like, yeah, let people decide whatever they want to do. But like, why is our White House rainbow right now? You know, it's just like taking on the entire identity of the country.
To that point, what are you guys individually kind of hopeful for, excited about with Trump and being the president that you will see affect your day-to-day life, if anything?
Well, I was thinking as I got out of my truck, when Parker called this an emergency podcast. You've never said that before. Emergency podcast. I was walking from my truck in here to the farm, and as I was grabbing the door handle to the farm, I was thinking if Kamala, one thing I'm actually glad about with this election is I don't have to think about, is her name Kamala or Kamala or whatever her name is. I don't have to think about that anymore. That's always been confusing to me. So we'll call her Harris. I grabbed the door handle and I thought, if Harris was president today, my mood doesn't change. I'm not necessarily happier or sad or more hopeful or less. You know, I don't, that whoever's in whoever's in the office of president doesn't affect my mood. But to your point, my day to day, I do feel more comfort with the Republican president, especially this one, with his foreign dealings with Ukraine, Iran, Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah,
from a
Russia,
Christianity
lens,
no. or just to the protection of America,
not
in your family.
I don't think that's
or use of resources, or what do you say?
I think it's more so like use of resources, and if you think about it from the perspective of having Harris in there meeting with Putin, it's very scary. Or Netanyahu, it's very scary. Or North Korea or China or Iran, having Harris deal with that is scary to me. Not from a Christianity perspective, not from a hope perspective, but just like you said, like resources, the possibility of a draft, how many troops are we sending over, how much money are we giving our military. I trust that with a Republican government that it's going to align more with how I believe we should deal with foreign adversaries.
Yeah, and the teams that each of those candidates would put around them. If you think about the type of people that Harris would put around her and the type of people that Trump would put around him, they're both going to have much different philosophies. Like we said, like one side's policies do bank, whether Trump would admit it or not, they would bank more on not on moral relativism, but on an objective truth that is bigger than ourselves. And Harris's policies were just so slanted toward the other way, to just complete and total moral and sexual relativism. And it's just like, you want that? There's no objective truth, and you want to like stand up for the free world? It's just, that's a scary thought. I think
our forefathers of this country, not all of them were Christian. We know that for sure, but you cannot deny that the Constitution and the idea that is America was founded upon the Judeo-Christian ideals. It just was. That's where it came from, and the people that came here to start this country were people that believed in that. So not necessarily each individual, but as a whole, they all believed in that. They believed in objective truth.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic when you think about the founding fathers and their relationship to God, and how much or how little that affected the way that the 13 colonies were put together, the way that each of those, with the way that eventually the Declaration of Independence was written up, like by what standard they wrote those things and for what purpose. Charlie Kirk, I think is his name, has a really good like 2-minute spiel on, and he's kind of pushing back against the idea that the founding fathers had zero tolerance, not tolerance, but that Christianity did not impact the founding of America at all because they were deists, or they believed that God existed, but they weren't necessarily born again Christians submitted to Christ. But there's really interesting pushback on that idea when you look at those founding documents of America mentioning Christianity over and over and over again, and the God of the Bible and the impact that had. Tyler, to answer your question, I think, how would it affect my day to day? I mean, I think that I personally, I definitely used to have the mentality of just like, it doesn't matter, just control what you can control. But man, with social media today, I see like firsthand videos of what's going on with illegal immigrants, like committing violent crimes in the cities. You see what's happening with these cities like Minneapolis that are taking on these far left policies that at the front, at the onset, look like they're having more compassion and they're sharing the wealth more and they're defunding police, but then you just see that those cities are actually some of the most unsafe cities. So I think it's better just for the United States in terms of, I mean, I think any sovereign nation would say that it's good to have border security, and I think we can all admit that we have a problem.
I saw something funny where it's like all these major celebrities like Cher and like Barbara Streisand, like these big names, saying like, if Trump is president, I'm going to leave. Like it happens every year, every election. There's like a lot of responses like, it's a lot harder than you think, because where are you going to go? Because you can't get into other countries because they have border control. Unlike us, you can't go to where you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fact that abortion is now going to be in the hands of the states to be able to make those decisions for themselves, it has to make you feel better. And I think as of now that Republicans have control of the House and the Senate. I know they have majority in the Senate. I think the House is still up for grabs. But I was listening to Al Mohler talk about how that's like a big deal, because even if you're the sitting president, it's hard to get any of your policies done if you don't have the majority. You're just going to get outvoted, which is interesting. But Lord willing, I think we'll have the majority in the House as well. So that would be good, man. I think that people, like you guys said, people were fed up, and the Kamala Harris side thought that people just wanted to get their main touch points were women's rights to choose and the trans movement, when in reality people just wanted, like the young people just want to be able to afford a house, like you were saying. Like people were just like, lower my grocery bill and help me like buy a house, and they didn't touch on that at all. All she did was over and over again say she wouldn't change anything that President Biden had done in her 4 years. And yet her main campaign slogan was, it's time to turn the page. And then people were just like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she wasn't elected or nominated, that just makes it weird too.
Which would have been really scary, man. It already is scary that the fact that we had somebody who is that close to becoming president who did not receive one vote to be put in that situation.
It just shows you the power that they have. But fortunately, our vote still matters, and Trump's in there.
I wanted to share one tweet from John Piper, who's a pastor that we really like. And it got a lot of hate, and so I'm curious on y'all's thoughts. John Piper said, presidential election results, having delivered us from one evil, God now tests us with another. And he's just getting destroyed, unfortunately. Because Piper always just kind of has that little bit more pessimistic view on the depravity of man.
Oh, that's good. I was actually thinking that, because he said, the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Deuteronomy 13:3.
So that's what he put as the footer on that tweet.
And I was actually thinking that, like, just today, kind of, I've had a little bit of hope, like, exciting, 4 years, like, business should be good, inflation should come down, interest rates, like, and I started finding myself thinking, having a little bit of hope in Trump. And while it's okay to do that, it was a reality check real quick. I was like, is my hope like in the Lord like that? Like as it should be, where, he is sufficient for everything that I need. So it was a good reality check. And I think that's what Piper's kind of trying to say is like, hey, just because your candidate won or lost, like, where's your hope? There's only one person that needs to be in, and that's Jesus.
Yeah. Granger, what do you think? A guy quote tweeted it and said, "Boomer Christianity is dead. They lost the young men, failed to rise up successors, and consequently became disconnected to where things actually are. They're completely clueless." Talking about Piper being clueless and that he lost all the young men.
Yeah, any man that would call John Piper clueless, I would say you better read your Bible a little bit more. Yeah. That's including me. But I've been just so into church history, especially this last couple months. In seminary, I'm in church history too. And just like I did in undergrad at Texas A&M, I find myself loving the history stuff most of all. Because it's to me, like studying history is kind of like a jigsaw puzzle that we have in our barn right now. The more pieces you start filling in, the more you start to see how they connect the whole big picture. And so the more, when you first start off, you're like, I don't know how this ends up, all this chaos ends up into this picture. But you start putting it together and you go, oh, because this is tied to this and this is tied to this. And so my professor is all about reading the primary sources. Instead of taking the main idea of how history unfolds, let's read the primary sources of the actual people. Because he says history is not about ideas or policies or cultural shifts. History's always been about people. And the people are the ones with the ideas. And they're the ones with the policies. And they're the ones that create cultural shifts. But it always starts with the people. And so when we look back of the last 2,000 years of church history, there have been times of government prosperity and there have been times of heavy government persecution. Honestly, sometimes, most of the time we see heavy persecution spreading the church, doing really well. It's doing that in Iran right now. It's doing it in China right now. But there have been other times when heavy government persecution, like in France, after the Reformation with John Calvin, that France came down, the government came down really hard on the reformers and crushed it. In England, the government was a lot more tolerating of the reformers, and it formed the Church of England. And so you got to look at that and go, what would it have been like if France actually tolerated a little bit of the Calvinist and that Reformation movement? What would France look like today? Because evidently now France is totally unevangelized. And it's the atheistic movement has just ravaged France. Most of them are atheist. I don't know. So what does that mean? I mean, obviously God is sovereign and he's got his hand on America and everybody else. He's guiding the ship. But you wonder, were we headed toward modern day France? Were we headed that way where we would get pushed out or persecuted, or we would actually have to move, or probably not us, but our children would have to flee to another country to live out their religious freedom because America no longer tolerates it? It's not too far-fetched to think that. So we should always think in terms of voting for policies that provide religious tolerance.
Yeah.
That was a long answer, but...
Yeah. And we also know that God brings judgment on nations by appointing poor leaders.
Yeah.
And so we can thank God. Thank God that for at least 4 years, we have somebody whose policies align with what we would see align a little bit more with Scripture. Any other last thoughts?
Yeah, to that point of we can thank God. I had a friend text me this morning that just said God is great with the little American flag. And kind of to your point, like I knew what he was saying. He was like, Trump's president. God's great. And my first response, my first thought was, God is always great. We should always thank God in victory and in defeat, in celebration and suffering. Because my mind went to like, okay, well, what would happen if Kamala won? Is God still great? Would I have got that text? Yeah, he's always great. He's always good. He anoints kings, elects kings, and he removes kings. Kind of like church the other week in Hebrews, like God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's the rock. He's unchanging. So it's just kind of a little thought and reminder for me that God is always great. So.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a great point, and we should always be careful as Christians pumping the brakes on getting our hope tied up too much in any person or king or president or terrorist or government, because that's not where our hope is, and that doesn't negate the fact that we should vote and we should care about policies. We should care about abortion. I think that was probably my biggest issue in this election, but like I said, when I walked into the farm today, if Harris was president, I wouldn't have lost hope. I wouldn't have thought God's not great or God failed or God missed this one, or I wouldn't have thought that. I would have just thought, well, that's not what my flesh wants, but the Lord is obviously taking us a new direction for his glory.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people would have stopped listening to you at the beginning when you started kind of not emphasizing the importance of America. I think that people are just so quick to get pissed when you even just talk about how America is a nation that is not written in the Bible, that will most likely come and go. I think that people are just, okay, well, you're just going to be passive in, and so none of this just even matters, Somebody quoted Mark Dever and said, before and after America, there was and will be the church. The nation is an experiment. The church is a certainty.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful experiment. And Dever would say that too.
Yeah.
He lives right in the middle of it in D.C., and he lives right in the middle of politics. And he loves it. He actually texted me a picture like midnight, sitting up watching the election, on the news.
Drinking a Celsius.
So he loves it. And I think it's fun to let me say it this way. Last night I drove to College Station to have dinner with some dear brothers, but also with a man from one of the top 2 or 3 most persecuted countries in the entire world towards religious freedom. And somehow it's just a wild story. I don't even know what I could tell on this podcast, but it's just a wild story how he ended up here because of a marriage visa. And now his wife is divorcing him, taking their child, claiming it's because of abuse, which it's not. I mean, this guy's got such a sweet soul. But he's probably going to be deported back to this heavily persecuted country. So heavily that I asked him, I said, what happens if they know, the government knows you're a Christian? And he looked at me just straight faced and said, they'll kill me at the airport. Like, he doesn't even get to leave the airport. That's how fast it is if he comes in proclaiming Christianity. So I was talking to my brother Sam, and I said, we were talking on the way home on the phone, and he said, it scares me to think that the more I teach him about who God is and the more he believes it, the more trouble I'm setting him up for in his future life. Mm-hmm. And so that's one way to look at it. Of course, Sam knows the deeper side of it, but it's so wild that we get to say what we want, what we don't want, and the God we trust, and we get to say that live on a podcast. And here's this man who's probably going to go back and have to be very careful with what he says, or he'll be killed.
If you're a believer, this is the closest you'll ever be to hell.
Yeah.
So, and if you're an unbeliever, this is the closest you'll ever be to heaven. So,
yeah, I guess both of those things work. Yeah.
Yeah. In one sense, that story just like makes you so grateful to be an American and you're like, yeah, this is worth fighting for. That religious freedom is worth fighting for. And we'll do all that we can for America to be run with policies and leaders who fear God, whose policies align with Scripture. And at the same time, we'll hold it all with an open hand, knowing that this is all temporary and that God's kingdom will reign forever. On a slight change of pace here, Tyler asked how this election will practically help our personal lives. It will definitely help in that we at least bought ourselves 4 more years of Yee Life YouTube.
Yeah, we did.
Knowing that guns will not be banned. And so I have before me our next video that we have going. Yee Life is a YouTube channel that we started. Granger started it 4 or 5 years ago. And in the last 6 months, we've just been doing a lot of gun experiments on it. And it's just absolutely blown up. We've gotten like 100 million views a month via YouTube Shorts. So
no big deal.
You guys can check that out. And so I was just going to show you a sneak preview of our next video that we're going to be filming today. We got this bulletproof mask that was like $200 or $300. It's kind of terrifying, but we're going to be testing it today against all these calibers.
On a mannequin, not you, right?
On a mannequin, yes, not on me.
You look like you're about to ride him.
Yeah, I know. It's like not the best timing for this podcast to have this very purge-looking mask on, but yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to give our podcast viewers.
What do you use that mask for in real life? Like riots and stuff?
Like, what is the practical application of this mask? I don't know. I think it's a Chinese ballistic face mask. I don't know why I'm looking at Brian like he would know. But
Give me some clickbait.
If you got really good aim, you go right there. You're done.
yeah. So anyway, I'm excited. We bought a 44 Magnum the other day. We're gonna start with a little 380. We got Granger's 450 Bushmaster. That was a gift to him from Kane Brown we've been using, so it's going to be really fun. So you guys can check that out if you go to Yee Life on YouTube. I think that's really it from us. We're going to try to start doing these more consistently, and excited to be involved in, I don't know, current events, what's going on in the world. We'll give you all our thoughts. And we'll hop on here hopefully weekly. Thank you guys for listening. Trump is back, baby. 4 more years.
4 more years, baby.
Let's do it. We're gonna make
hope is restored. Just kidding.
MAGA. See y'all.
See ya.